In this video, we're going to take a look at the included first-person controller that comes along with Unity. Now, as you can see in my scene, I've already got one of these. As a matter of fact, we've been using it in most of our other videos when we play test various assets in our scene. So what I'm going to do is select this and delete it out, and we'll talk about bringing one in from scratch, and then we'll take a look at the various properties you have access to control its behavior. So first off, underneath our standard assets, you'll see our two character controllers, being the first and third person controller. Now the first person is real easy to set up. Here's the entire process for you. Drag, drop. You do want to make sure it's sitting up above your terrain height, because if it's still sitting down halfway through, if you hit play, you will fall through the map. And that's all she wrote on that. So we're going to lift it up into the air, like so. So when we hit play, here we are. Now before we take a look at any of the properties, let's just move around for a moment and kind of familiarize ourselves with the controller. So we have WSAD to move around with. We can look around with the mouse. All stuff that I'm sure you've seen if you've ever played any first-person shooters on a computer. But there are a few restrictions in place. We have a limit over how quickly we can move in all four of our directions. We have the ability to jump, which is also something we can control. As we go up hills, we slow down. We're not going as quickly as we were previously. And if we hit a surface that is too steep, we lose the ability to climb up it. These are all elements that we can control inside the first-person controller. Now, let's take a look at that. Go ahead and stop playing so we're not kind of flailing the camera about. Our first-person controller is it's a game object that contains a few things. First off, we have the graphics object. This is really just the capsule that represents it.
It's a visual element that you can use while looking in your scene view to figure out where your character is.
Yeah, it's just a piece of geometry to help you see where this should be. Next, we have the main camera. Now, this is just a regular camera. It has a few things on it to help out with turning this into a game-style camera. It has a GUI layer, a flare layer. It has a mouse look script, which we will come to, and it has an audio listener, which all cameras do. Now, let's start off at the first-person controller level, and we can see that there are several different components that have been bolted onto this. And we'll just start at the top and work our way down.
Right. This character controller is a component that is available for all game objects. If you actually go to the component drop-down in the menu, and you go down to physics, the second one you see is the character controller. This is a controller component that is available that you can add to any game object that you have. You typically only want to have one in any game at a time, and it has certain settings that will control your character. But with this, you can't actually just put this on an object and move them around the world. It actually has no scripts to look for input from the keyboard or a joystick controller or a gamepad. You have to use that via scripting.
Well, as is suggested by its location in the component menu, this is just a physics object, and the properties included in it are as follows. It has a height, which, just as the name suggests, controls the height of the character, or the height that will be calculated for the character's height. We have the radius, which is how big around the character is going to be. Basically, when objects come this close to the character controller, they will be considered to be colliding.
Correct. And if you look at those numbers, you have to remember that those are actually in Unity units, which are meters.
Right.
So if you think about it, 2 meters high means that this character is about 7 feet tall.
Yeah, it's a very tall person, which is why we saw earlier in a previous video when we were bringing in assets from Maya, if we were building them at a 1-to-1 scale using meters, they tend to look a little bit small. And so just to compensate for that, instead of taking our default character controller and bringing it down, we actually scaled all those things up so that we could continue working with the default settings here. Now, moving down from height and radius, we have the slope limit. This caps out the angle at which we can climb up a hill. Anything steeper than 45 degrees, we simply can't climb. Next, we have step offset. Now, what is step offset going to be, Lee?
Well, step offset is a number that is put into place to control how far your character controller can step up onto an object. If you were approaching a staircase and you wanted to step up you need to make sure that your stairs are actually less than 0.4 meters tall, or it will act as a blocking area and you won't be able to go up.
Yeah,
you'll actually get stopped.
Yeah, you'll bump into it. So make sure your steps are lower than 0.4 or just adjust this value. If you already had something in that had higher steps, you could always tweak this out. Next we have skin width. This controls how far into our character's radius a collider can penetrate before a collision is detected. So it's just kind of like, it's a quality check for our calculations.
Right. If you remember, this character controller is not actually a traditional physics or a physics collider. It actually has an entire class behind it, and it calculates separate than a rigid body would.
That's right. Now we also have the minimum move distance. If any action that we take, anything we do to this character controller would move it less than this distance, then the character controller simply will not move. For instance, if we take this and set it up to 1 and we hit play, we're now locked in place. I can't move right now, and I'm actually hitting W, A, S, and D, and that is because those inputs are not moving our character a full unit during one of the updates, and so we're just simply not moving.
Right. What happens is when you push WASD, it is actually looking at the input of the keyboard almost like it would a joystick that's an analog.
Like an impulse.
Right, and it starts off from 0 and ramps up to 1 before you get to the full range of motion. So your initial move is going to be less than 0, you won't move. And with the controls, there's actually an acceleration factor, and because that acceleration can't happen when your min move distance is less than that amount, you never get up to a speed that's significant enough to actually overcome that.
That's right. And down from this, we have the center of the character, so we can actually offset the center of calculation in X, Y, and Z axes. So that wraps up the character controller component. Now, down from here, we have a mouse look component, or a mouse look script, excuse me.
Yeah.
Now, there are 2 of these. There is one that sits here at the first-person controller level. There's actually a second one that sits on the main camera. Now, why do we have 2 of them?
Well, one is controlling the rotation of your character, which direction he's looking horizontally. That would be the one that is on the first-person controller. If you look at it, the first parameter there is axes.
And you notice that we're axes were following mouse X. So the left and right motion of the mouse, and you'll see that the minimum and maximum in X are negative 360 and positive 360. So we have full range of motion here.
Exactly. And
go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you look at the sensitivity, that is a factor of how sensitive your mouse is going to be to its rotation.
That's right. So how far you move the mouse versus how much you spin here inside of Unity. Now, if we continue on down past that, we have the character motor. Now, there's a lot of things taking place here in the character motor, and I'm going to close up some of these properties, and we'll just expand them while we get to them. First off, can control. That's pretty obvious. Do you want to be able to control this character or not? So generally, you're going to want to leave this checked. Next, use fixed update. Now, what exactly do they mean when they say use fixed update?
Well, fixed update is actually an overloaded method that you can access inside of scripts. If you remember in a previous video, when we were talking about the physics manager from the edit menu, we could set the time step at which physics or the fixed update takes place. This is outside of a typical update, which happens every frame. So the fixed update is happening at a stepped interval. So you can set up your character motor to move either at a fixed update, which is going to be adjusted based on the frame rate that you're getting, or you can uncheck it, which will force it to update every frame of your gameplay.
Right, which we're not going to do because if we uncheck it, basically that means the character is getting calculated a lot more often. Now moving down from here, we have the movement properties. Now there are several of these, but most of them are pretty straightforward. First, we have max forward speed, sideways speed, and backward speed. Now, what that means, and I'm sure you've already kind of figured it out, is that's how quickly we can move in our 4 primary directions. So when we hit W, when we hit S, and when we hit A and D, those properties control how quickly we can do that. So just for testing purposes, because we're here inside the game view, I'm going to spin you around several times to get the mouse over here, and we'll set our max speed up to 30. And now, if we aim ourselves down this ravine, we take off like a missile. However, if we try to slide sideways, we can still only slide at 6. We can only go backwards at 6, but we can go forward really, really fast. And we actually have a hard time slowing down because we kind of carry some of that momentum with us. So let me hit Control P to stop playing, and we immediately lose that value because we changed it while we were playing. Now next we have the slope speed multiplier. This controls how fast your character can move on a proportional sense, so how much of the maximum speed you can use as the slope increases while your character's running around. And it is a type of property we don't actually see very often in Unity. It is a curve. And so it's graphing this out. Now what we have here is running up the vertical axis, we have the amount of our maximum speed that we have access to, and running horizontally, we have the angle that the character would be moving up. So what this graph is actually dictating or denoting is when we have no slope whatsoever, we get 100% of our motion. As our slope increases, by the time we make it to 90, and if I hold down the mouse button on this key, we can see that, at a value of 90 degrees, meaning a perfectly vertical wall, we have no motion, which is kind of obvious anyway. It's also kind of moot because earlier on we showed that in the character controller, we are only allowed to climb up a 45-degree angle anyway.
Right. Past that, the character controller is going to stop your motion before you ever hit the limit that is provided by the slope speed multiplier.
That's right. Now we can change this. So right now, if we just leave it kind of where it is and I hit play, what we end up with is almost a little hard to see the difference in, just because, you know, you're going up at an angle and part of your brain really kind of expects you to slow down, which is why this was engineered the way it has been. But we can make it a lot more obvious. If we click on this curve, hold down Control, which will activate snapping while we move the keyframes, we can drag this to the left all the way down to about 20 degrees. So now at 20 degrees, we can't go any further. Basically, we have really, really weak legs at this point. So now we head up this hill once again, and we're slowing down, and that's it. That's as far as we can go. We can't climb any higher. We're like right at the very edge of 20. Once we get past 20, we just can't move at all. So let's go ahead and put that back so that our character can move around a little bit once again. We'll slide that back up to 90 degrees. Now, moving down from here, we have max ground acceleration. This is the maximum amount of acceleration the character has when going from 0 to whatever the maximum speed happens to be. If let's say you had a really high maximum speed, like maybe you weren't treating this like it was a character, like it was something like a hovercraft, and you felt that you were accelerating too slowly, you could speed this up. If you feel like you're getting up to your maximum speed too quickly, of course you could slow it down. But that's really all it is. It's just lateral motion while you're on the ground. We have the same thing here. We have max air acceleration. This is how quickly you can change your rate of velocity while you're in the air. And it's not limited just to falling, because when you're airborne, you still have some control over how far to the left and right you're moving. You can still laterally move the character while you fall, and this controls that too. Moving down from here, we have our gravity. Gravity is not dictated by our standard physics systems on this character. This is something that is coded into the script, and we can control it here. You'll also notice that it doesn't necessarily correlate to real-world gravity either.
Right. If you remember, the character controller isn't a traditional rigid body, so it doesn't apply, or it doesn't work with forces. It doesn't respect gravity, and actually, if you look at it, it doesn't even really respect collisions the way a rigid body would.
No, it's really just kind of a way to keep track of what should be colliding. That's the big thing the character controller is going to afford. It also gives us things like that slope limit to control at what point we can no longer keep ascending.
Right.
Now, continuing from here, we have our max fall speed. That's just your maximum speed you're going to reach when you fall.
Right. It's kind of like terminal velocity.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Now, that is all of your movement controls. Very, very easy to adjust, to tweak, to get exactly the kind of motion you're looking for when you're running around. But that's not everything we have. We have jumping. Now, the first jumping property is pretty easy. Enabled. If you switch this off and hit play, you can no longer jump. I can tap the space bar all day and I will never jump. So if you want to have one of those games where you can't jump anymore, there you go. Now, you have two values that allow you to control the height of your jump. You have base height and extra height, and the combination of these two values control your height. So we could take our base height, set something awesome like 100, and now if we come into the game and tap spacebar, we jump 100 meters into the air. That takes a minute to fall, too. Now, once we get back down to the bottom, we can take our extra height. What do you say, another 100 meters? Hit play, and now let's jump again to watch what happens. We have liftoff.
And if you hit space again?
No,
no double jumps.
Yeah, we're still falling. No double jumps here. We'd have to code that into our own custom controller. So let's put these back down at 1 and 1. Next, we have perp amount. Now, perp amount controls how much perpendicular angle you will attain or you will receive when you jump from a tilted surface.
Right. If you're standing on a slope, what it does is it figures out the angle of that slope, and then depending on your perp amount, it will calculate how much of that slope to apply to your jumping direction.
Well, take a look at this tree. Watch the tree and the tree behind it. So I'm kind of lining the camera up along a couple of trees. When I jump, we're just going straight up and down right now. Now, if I pause, so I'm just going to hit Control Shift P to pause, and we'll go back over to the game view so that's not visually confusing. I'll go ahead and take my perp amount, and we'll set this up to 1. So now we're getting 100% of the perpendicular angle of the slope we're standing on, and we'll unpause. So I'll put my focus back over here, Control Shift P again, and now when I jump, you see we get thrown off to the side a little bit. We don't maintain the velocity throughout the entire jump. It's just kind of an initial force, which is why we go out diagonally, and then when we fall, we just end up going straight down.
Right. Now, this amount is controlled by the slope that you can actually stand on.
That's right.
So if you can walk to it and stand on it, that amount is being applied at that point in time.
That's right. Now down from here we have steep perp amount, which does the same thing, but it's for surfaces that are too steep for us to walk on, say a surface that we're sliding down. And by default this is set to 0.5, so if we're sliding down a really steep surface and we have enough time to tap the spacebar, 50% of the perpendicular angle of that slope will be imparted in our jump. So in effect, we will jump out a bit away from the cliff. That's how that works. Now, that's everything for jumping. So let me go ahead and stop playing, and we'll jump down to the next set of properties. This is the moving platform properties. These are great. Okay, the first one we have is enabled. Do you want to be able to get on moving platforms? Yes or no? Now, it just so happens, completely by coincidence, I assure you, that we have a moving platform in our level. It fits in so nicely, too. I mean, it really looks like it belongs there. You know what I'm saying? So now let's jump on it, and we can ride this moving platform around. Now, if you're curious, all this is a cube that has been animated. That's all this is. So if you wanted to make one yourself, all you'd have to do is grab a cube and animate it, and you'd be good to go. If we disable moving platform and we hit play, well, we missed the first flight, so we gotta wait for this to come back over. I was trying to figure out why I wasn't moving there for a second. I was hitting the 2 key instead of the W key. Don't tell anybody. All right, if I jump on this...
Now you will move because...
I'll move when it lifts me up.
Exactly.
But you notice it slid out from under me because we're not based on it. Now, I'll show you that again. Watch this. We jump on, and since it's going up, we do go up. But as soon as it moves to the side, we fall off.
Right, and the reason we get that type of reaction is because the character controller does do some collision detection. It is actually looking for something below it and then tries to maintain that. But if that moving platform slides away, it's not going to stick with that platform.
That's right. So we'll go ahead and leave that on. And our next set of properties are a little less obvious. These allow you to control how movement is transferred to the character when you jump off of a moving platform. Now these are a little bit trickier to demonstrate, but I can get something pretty close if we pull down our gravity. So if we go over to, where are we hiding our gravity?
It will be under character mode.
It's under character
movement.
It's in, yeah, I'm sorry. I just totally had a brain lock. Under gravity, if we take our gravity, let's set this really far down. I tried one last time, and you could just about get it, but let me try half that. Let me see if I can get away with 0.5. It will make getting on the platform a little interesting, but I think I can use this to prove how these moving platform movement transfer properties are working. We have 3. We have initial transfer, we have perma transfer, and we have perma locked. Now I'll tell you what they do first. Initial transfer is going to take the motion that our moving platform has and impart it to the character when they jump off, but only for a moment. That motion that, so like, let's say we're moving sideways. Consider our character standing on a moving train. An elevated train. That's a really good example. So our character is standing on an elevated train, zipping over a city at 50 miles an hour. If his settings are set to initial transfer, when he jumps off, for just a moment, he'll be moving along with the train, but that lateral motion, that 50-mile-an-hour motion of the train, will bleed off, and then he'll fall straight down.
Now the perma transfer is very similar. You will get that initial velocity of the train transfer to your character, but it will actually stay with that character to the moment he touches down on the ground.
That's right. So if we were screaming along at 50 miles an hour and we jumped off the train, we would continue moving at 50 miles an hour sideways all the way until we contacted some other object to land on. So all the way to the ground, we'd be still going sideways at 50 miles an hour. Perma-locked is a little different. Perma-locked would be really confusing if the train went around a corner right as we jumped off of it. Because what this means is we're going to continue moving relative to the train until we touch the ground. So if we're zipping along at 50 miles an hour and we jump off the train, and as soon as we jump off, the train turns a corner, we're actually going to turn that corner with the train in midair relative to where we were. So that can be a little bit little tricky, but let's see if I can demonstrate some of these. So let's start off with our movement transfer set to initial transfer. This one might be a little hard to see exactly, but we'll give it a shot. Now again, I missed the first flight, but that's just kind of how this goes. And let's try getting on now. Oh, I missed it. I was so close. Oh yeah, my jump is so slow. I don't know if we're going to be able to do this with the gravity so low. Let's try. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Oh, I can't do it. Okay. All right. It was worth a shot. Let me try it at 1, because I really do want you to see how these work. I'm sure my excellent descriptions got everything across exactly the way they should, but it's so much cooler when you see it. All right. Coming down, landing. Awesome. But I missed. Okay, fine. So we're just I lack the skills to get us on that platform with gravity being so low, and unfortunately, unless we are really high up in the air, this is something that is a little tricky to demonstrate.
Right. Even in practice, it took a good 5-6 times to get it the first time.
Yeah, and I really don't want to spend the whole video showing you how terrible I am at jumping onto platforms. So again, we'll just kind of go over the properties one more time. Initial transfer is just going to take that initial motion that you have on your moving platform and impart it to the character, but it will bleed off over time while you fall. Perma transfer is going to maintain whatever that motion was the moment you left the platform. You're going to keep that all the way down to the ground. And then perma locked is going to keep you moving relative to whatever that platform is doing, even if it changes direction, all the way until you touch something else. So those are your movement transfer properties. Finally, we have our sliding properties. So we have enabled, can we slide down hills? If you switch this off, you won't slide. You'll just kind of cling to them like Spider-Man all the way down until they become so steep that you just fall off like a perfectly vertical face. You have a sliding speed. This is how quickly you will slide down steep inclines. So really, I think at this point, it's anything greater than 45 degrees because we can't slide down that, or we can't stand on that. Next, we have sideways control. This is how much of our speed we are able to control to the left and right. So as we're sliding down a big, long, steep hill, how much of the speed we are going...
The sliding speed.
The sliding speed, that's right. We can apply to our left and right motion.
Right. If you were to set this to, say, 0.5, you could move to the left or right at 5 with a sliding speed of 10.
That's right. And then finally, we have our speed control. This is how much we are able to influence our speed while we are sliding. So right now this is set to 0.4 and our sliding speed is 10. That means we could push our speed, our sliding speed up to 14 or slow it down to 0.6. And that's the most we can get out of this. So that is a quick rundown of all of our character motor script controls. So let's go ahead and close all these up. And down here at the bottom, we have our first-person input controller. This is not something we really need to get into. This is just a script that has no properties exposed that is going to give us access to the inputs that are inside our input manager. And we took a look at those in a previous video. Now, if we jump down here to our main camera, we have one more script. It's another copy of our mouse look script. And again, if we take a look at this, as we mentioned earlier, this uses the mouse Y, and this controls our up and down look. So in short, our rotation in Y, turning to the left, turning to the right, that is controlled at the first-person controller level, and our ability to look up and down is controlled here on the camera. Here we can change the limits for our up and down look, which are currently set to positive and negative 60 degrees, and we can control our sensitivity. So, Lee, unless you had anything else you want to add...
No, I think that's about it.
Yeah, that's a complete walkthrough of the first-person controller that is included along with Unity. Make sure you bring this in, tweak it to your heart's content, get the kind of motion you're looking for out of your characters. But that's going to wrap up things for this video. Thanks for watching.